There's a name that once appeared on every map of the known world, stretching from Eastern Europe all the way to the Pacific Ocean, a name so vast it dwarfed empires. And then, across roughly 2 centuries, it quietly disappeared. Not conquered, not absorbed, just erased. The name was Tartaria. And the story of how it ended may be the strangest thing you've never been taught for centuries. European cartographers labeled the enormous landmass of Central Asia and Siberia as Tartaria or Grand Tartary. This wasn't a single unified kingdom in the traditional sense. Historians debate exactly what it represented. A loose cultural zone, a geographic designation, or something more organized. But here's what's not debated. On maps from the 1500s through the 1700s, Tartaria was marked as one of the largest territories on Earth, and the people who lived near its borders described it with unmistakable fear. Medieval European chronicles called the Tartars the nomadic peoples of the Eurasian steppe, something that had no clean translation. A German bishop named Ivo of Narbonne, writing in 1241, said the armies coming from the east were not like any enemy men had faced before. They did not act like soldiers. They moved too fast. They communicated across distances in ways that seemed impossible. And they showed no exhaustion, no mercy, and no pattern that European commanders could predict. Now, before we go any further, it's important to separate fact from theory here, because this is where the story gets complicated. The confirmed history is this: the Mongol Empire, which many scholars directly associate with the Tartars, was the largest contiguous land empire in human history. At its peak, it controlled over 24 million square kilometers. Its cavalry could cover 100 miles in a single day, a speed that was genuinely incomprehensible to settled civilizations at the time. And its psychological warfare was so advanced that many cities surrendered simply from reputation alone. Before a single soldier arrived, contemporary chroniclers, struggling to explain what they were witnessing, reached for the only language they had. They called the armies of the steppe inhuman, demonic, not metaphorically, literally. A monk named Matthew Paris wrote in the 1240s that the Tartars had emerged from hell itself, that they drank blood, consumed human flesh, and operated under a kind of intelligence that no living general could understand. Was he describing reality? Or was he describing the terror of facing something so tactically advanced that his mind had no other framework for it? The Mongol advance into Europe in 1241 stopped. Suddenly, the armies turned back after the Battle of Legnica, one of the most devastating defeats European knights had ever suffered, and never returned in full force. For 200 years, historians have offered explanations. The death of the Great Khan, political succession disputes, supply lines stretching too thin. If you're finding this fascinating, consider subscribing. There's a lot more buried. History like this that rarely makes it into textbook stock. So here's the picture that emerges when you lay all the evidence together. An empire so powerful that contemporary observers could only describe it as supernatural. A civilization that covered a third of the Earth's landmass, and a collapse driven not by a rival army, not by revolution, but by something invisible, microscopic, and utterly indiscriminate. The Mongol Empire fragmented into successor states throughout the 14th century. The Golden Horde weakened. Trade routes shut down. The steppe, once the highway of the world, went quiet. And gradually, over generations, the word Tartaria shrunk on maps, from a name that covered continents to a label on a footnote, until cartographers stopped writing it altogether. What came next was something stranger still. Much of the architectural and cultural legacy of those Central Asian cities, cities that had been among the wealthiest and most sophisticated on Earth, was either absorbed into the Russian Empire or simply lost. Travelers in the 18th century described arriving at locations that old maps marked as thriving settlements and finding only ruins, rubble, and locals who had no memory of what once stood there. Now, there are modern theories that go much further than this. Some claim Tartaria was a global civilization deliberately erased from history. That's speculative, and the evidence doesn't support it as fact. What the evidence does support is something almost as unsettling. That a civilization of extraordinary scale really did disappear. That its end was triggered in part by a biological catastrophe that seemed to come from nowhere. And that the people who witnessed its fall described it, again and again, in terms that reach past the human and into something else entirely. Maybe what they encountered was military genius so extreme it looked like the supernatural. Maybe it was a disease so lethal it felt like divine punishment. Or maybe when something is powerful enough to erase an empire from the map of the world, the human mind simply doesn't have the language for it. Whatever Tartaria truly was, it was real. It was enormous, and whatever destroyed it was something its people never saw coming. If that keeps you up at night, you're not alone. Drop your thoughts below. What do you think the chronicles were really describing?